The message spread like wildfire, across human space, across every colony, every military outpost, and every listening station. The desperate distress call of Hope's mercy echoed. The ship was gone. The crew was dead. The enemy had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. On Earth, the leaders of the United Human Federation sat in silence as they watched the final moments of the attack, played back from the ship's black box. The screams, the explosions, the cruel voice over the comms. The silence that followed. Admiral Elias Graves sat motionless in his chair, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had fought wars before. He had buried soldiers before. But this was different. This was not war. This was an execution. President Helena Orlov broke the silence. Who did this? Her voice was cold, deadly. The intelligence officer at the table swallowed hard. We have identified the attackers. They belong to the Tsalvanni Dominion. A ripple of anger spread through the room. The Tsalvanni had always been hostile, but even they had abided by the rules of war. Until now. Orlov's voice remained calm, but everyone in the room could feel the fury beneath the surface. And their response. The intelligence officer hesitated. Then he placed a datapad on the table. A recorded message played. This was a warning. Humanity has overstepped. There will be no negotiations, no mercy. Stay in your place, or more of your ships will burn. The recording ended. The room was silent once more. Admiral Graves exhaled slowly. Then he stood. We've been too quiet for too long. They think we are weak. They think we will roll over and let them slaughter us like cattle. He turned to the assembled leaders, his voice now a growl. They are wrong. Across the Human Federation, the call to arms was sent. The war fleet, long dormant, began to stir. In shipyards across the Sol system, massive warships powered up, their engines rumbling like sleeping giants awakening from slumber. Factories switched to wartime production overnight. Soldiers, pilots, and engineers were recalled to duty. And in the heart of space, where humanity had once sworn never to fight unless provoked, the largest armada in human history began to form. The Tsalvanni Dominion had made one fatal mistake. They believed they had ended a conflict before it could begin. But in reality, they had only just lit the fuse. The stars above Earth were no longer quiet. They were alive with movement, an armada forming at a scale unseen in human history. Warships, carriers, and destroyers assembled in high orbit, their hulls gleaming under the glow of the sun. The call had gone out, and humanity had answered. Admiral Elias Graves stood on the bridge of the UNS Retribution, the largest and most advanced warship ever built. Its black hull bristled with weaponry, railguns that could tear through planets, missile batteries capable of overwhelming entire fleets, and a shield system stronger than anything humanity had ever deployed in combat. Retribution had been meant as a deterrent, a symbol of power. Now it would be the instrument of vengeance. Across the fleet, officers and soldiers stood at attention, watching as the final ships took their positions. The silence of space belied the storm about to be unleashed. All ships report ready, Admiral, came the voice of Captain Renner, his second in command. Graves nodded. Open the fleet-wide channel. A moment later, his voice echoed across hundreds of ships, into the helmets of thousands of soldiers, and through the hearts of billions watching from Earth. 3 days ago, the Tsalvanni Dominion committed an act of pure barbarism. They did not attack a military target. They did not fight warriors. They butchered the wounded. They slaughtered the helpless. The silence across the fleet was absolute. Every pilot, every gunner, every officer felt the weight of his words. We are not fighting for conquest. We are not fighting for territory. We are not fighting because we seek war. We fight because we must. Graves took a breath, his voice like steel. The Tsalvanni thought they could strike at us without consequence. They thought we would bow. They were wrong. A beat of silence. Then his final words. We do not seek their surrender. We do not seek their apology. We seek only justice, and we will have it. Across the fleet, weapons systems powered up. Engines roared to life. The command was given. All ships jumped to war. A ripple of blue light flashed across the void as the entire human armada disappeared into hyperspace. The Tsalvanni High Command had not expected this. For decades, they had viewed humanity as a lesser race. Resourceful, yes, but too cautious, too diplomatic. They had expected outrage, condemnation, maybe even a few skirmishes. But an all-out war? Impossible. Until now. Admiral Vekar stood in his war room, watching as sensor data flooded in. Hundreds of human warships had emerged from hyperspace at the border colonies. Already, the outer defense fleets were falling one by one. The humans were not just attacking. They were annihilating. Vekar turned to his officers, his mandibles clicking in agitation. How many ships have we lost? One of his commanders hesitated before speaking. 7 colonies have been hit, 43 vessels destroyed. Their fleets move with terrifying precision. There is no pattern to their attacks, no time to regroup. Every time we send reinforcements, they're already gone, jumping to the next target before we can react. Vekar narrowed his eyes. This was not how humans fought. They were supposed to be slow, careful, predictable. But these humans, they fought like predators. Another officer stepped forward. "Sir, we just received a transmission from the humans." Vekar's mandibles twitched. "Play it." The screen flickered. A human officer stood in full military dress, his gaze ice-cold. Behind him, the insignia of the United Human Federation glowed like a burning brand. "This is Admiral Elias Graves of the Human War Fleet. You are receiving this message because your people committed an unforgivable crime. You murdered our wounded. You slaughtered civilians." His voice turned deadly. "You broke the rules of war. Now, we will remind you why those rules exist." The transmission ended. The room was silent. Vekar's claws tightened. "Prepare the fleet. If they want war, we will give them one." But deep down, he felt something gnawing at his core, a slow, creeping realization. The humans had not come for war. They had come for vengeance. The void of space had always been silent, indifferent to the conflicts of those who fought within it. But now, the silence was shattered. Humanity had come, and it had come with fire. The first engagement unfolded above the Tsalvanni colony world of Varishtal, a fortified planet with shipyards, orbital defenses, and a fleet meant to deter any foolish enough to challenge the Dominion. The Tsalvanni had been confident, until now. The human war fleet arrived in perfect formation. Hundreds of warships exited hyperspace in coordinated waves, each one executing precise maneuvers before the defenders could react. At the center of it all, leading the charge, was the UNS Retribution. Admiral Elias Graves stood on the bridge, his expression unreadable as he gazed at the tactical map. Tsalvanni battlecruisers were scrambling into defensive positions, orbital platforms powering up their cannons. Fighters launched from hangars, forming intercept squads. But it was too late. All ships, weapons free, Graves commanded. The order was simple. The effect was devastating. The first human volley struck like a hammer from the gods. Massive railgun rounds traveled at near-relativistic speeds, tearing through shields and armor as if they were paper. Missiles followed, hundreds of them, each one programmed to weave through enemy countermeasures before delivering their payloads. The Tsalvanni fleet fired back, their plasma weapons scorching the void, but they had made a critical miscalculation. The humans did not fight like the other species of the galaxy. They did not engage in slow, predictable fleet battles. They moved fast, hit hard, and vanished before the enemy could respond. Strike groups of human destroyers darted between the Tsalvanni capital ships, launching precision attacks that disabled engines, weapons, and shields before darting away like sharks in bloody water. Carrier-based fighters swarmed through the chaos, unleashing coordinated bombing runs that left Salvani warships crippled and drifting. On the bridge of the XSS Kavarnak, Admiral Vekar watched in horror as his fleet was torn apart. "Sir, we're losing battleships at an unsustainable rate," one of his officers shouted. "Order the defense platforms to concentrate fire on their command ships." Vekar snarled. But the UNS Retribution had already anticipated this. Its shields flared as it absorbed the incoming fire, returning devastation in kind. A single broadside from its primary cannons annihilated a Salvani battleship in seconds, leaving nothing but debris and broken bodies floating in the void. The Salvani defenses were failing. And then, the final strike came. "Admiral, enemy flagship in range," Captain Renner reported. Graves nodded. "Target their engines. Leave them dead in the water." A final salvo from the Retribution's railguns slammed into the Kavarnak, shearing off its engines in a brutal display of force. The once mighty Salvani command ship drifted, powerless, its remaining weapons flickering and failing. The battle was over. Humanity had won. But there was no cheering aboard the human warships. No celebration. They had come for vengeance, and vengeance was not yet complete. Graves sent a message to the surviving Salvani ships. A warning. This was just the beginning. His voice echoed through their failing systems. "You took our mercy ship. You slaughtered our wounded. We will not stop until every last one of you understands the cost of that mistake." The transmission ended. Then, without another word, the human fleet turned and vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind only fire, wreckage, and the terrified whispers of those who had survived. For the first time in history, that Salvani Dominion understood what it had done. And for the first time in history, they knew fear. The war should have been over quickly. The Salvani Dominion had been broken at Verishtal, their fleet shattered, their defenses in ruins. Humanity's message had been delivered with fire and blood, and the galaxy had watched in stunned silence. But war was never simple. Admiral Elias Graves stood on the bridge of the UNS Retribution, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy. Something wasn't right. That Salvani should have been in full retreat, yet new fleets were forming. More warships than they should have been capable of mustering. More resources than their fractured dominion could supply. How the hell are they still fighting? Captain Renner muttered beside him. Their shipyards at Verishtal were destroyed. We crippled their logistics. This shouldn't be possible. Graves exhaled slowly. He had been in wars before. He knew when something didn't add up. "We're missing a piece of the puzzle," he said. "And I think we're about to find out what it is." A proximity alarm flared across the bridge. "Incoming fleet detected," the sensor officer shouted. Massive energy signatures. Multiple capital ships dropping from hyperspace. Graves turned sharply to the viewport as the blackness of space split open. And the truth was revealed. They were not alone. A second fleet, larger than anything the Salvani had fielded before, emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. Their ships were unfamiliar, sleek, angular designs bristling with advanced weaponry. Their hulls bore no insignia, no markings of allegiance. But Graves knew who they were. A whispered name among intelligence reports, a shadow in the background of galactic politics. The Vasson Ascendancy, a race that had stayed out of interstellar conflicts for centuries. A race known for its vast technological supremacy. A race that had, until now, remained silent. And yet, here they were, siding with the Salvani. "Bastards," Renner muttered. They were backing the Salvani the whole time. Graves clenched his jaw. It made sense. That Salvani should have been broken, but someone had been propping them up. Someone had supplied them with ships, weapons, and technology to keep the war going. And now, that someone had stepped out of the shadows. The bridge fell silent as a transmission request flickered onto the main display. "Open the channel," Graves ordered. The screen lit up, revealing an alien figure draped in regal armor. Their elongated features cold and expressionless. The Vasuan commander regarded Graves with mild amusement, as if studying an insect before crushing it beneath his heel. "Humans," the Vasuan said smoothly, "you have overstepped your place in the galaxy." Graves folded his arms. "Your Xalvani puppets slaughtered a medical ship," we answered. The Vasuan gave a slow, dismissive nod. "Yes, and you have demonstrated your strength well. But you fail to understand something fundamental, Admiral Graves." The alien leaned forward, its eyes gleaming like twin embers. "The Dominion is not yours to punish." Graves' hands curled into fists. "You backed them," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "You gave them the resources to continue this war. You let them massacre civilians, and you still stand by them." The Vasuan commander tilted his head. "We do what is necessary to maintain balance. Humanity is unpredictable, unstable. We cannot allow you to rise unchallenged." There it was. The truth laid bare. This wasn't about the Xalvani. This was about control. The Vasuan had seen what humanity was capable of, what they could become, and that terrified them. "So this isn't about justice," Graves said. "It's about keeping us in check, making sure we stay beneath you." The Vasuan smiled. "You understand quickly. That is why we will offer you a chance. Admiral, withdraw your forces. End this war now. Accept the balance of power as it stands, and we will allow your species to continue existing, unharmed." The bridge was deathly silent. The officers and crew turned to Graves, waiting for his response. He stared at the Vasuan for a long moment. Then he smiled. A slow, grim smile. "You think you're giving me a choice," he said, "but you've already made mine for me." The Vasuan's expression flickered, just for a second, a shadow of uncertainty. "You propped up butchers," Graves continued. "You armed them, funded them, and when we came to deliver justice, you stood in our way." His voice turned ice cold. "That means you're just as guilty as they are." The Vasuan narrowed his eyes. "Be very careful, Admiral." Graves leaned forward. "No, you be careful." Then he cut the transmission. The fleet was already moving. "Battle formations," Graves ordered, his voice steady as iron. "I want firing solutions on those Vasuan capital ships now." Across the UNS Retribution, weapon systems roared to life. Targeting locks flared across the command displays. The fleet was outnumbered, outgunned, and it didn't matter. "Sir," Renner said, "we're outmatched. They're ships." Graves turned to him, his gaze hard as stone. "Doesn't change a damn thing." The battle had already begun. The Vasuan fleet opened fire, and hell itself erupted in the void. The first wave of energy blasts struck the Retribution's shields, sending shudders through the massive warship. Human destroyers peeled off, launching a swarm of torpedoes at the enemy's front line. The Xalvani ships moved in tandem, pressing the attack, confident in their newfound strength. But they had underestimated humanity before, and they were about to pay for it again. "Hit them hard," Graves ordered. The response was instant. The human fleet didn't just fight back. It tore into the enemy like a force of nature. Strike squadrons flanked from all sides, disabling key systems. Human railguns, though primitive compared to Vasuan energy weapons, hit with brutal, devastating force, ripping through the enemy's hulls in ways they hadn't expected. A Vasuan battleship took a direct hit from a coordinated missile barrage, its shields flickering, its engines failing. Seconds later, a human dreadnought rammed straight through it, splitting the ship in half in a blinding explosion. The tide of battle surged, chaotic and brutal. Then the Retribution's alarms blared. Enemy flagship locking onto us. On the display, the Vasuan command vessel powered up its main weapon, a supercharged particle lance designed to pierce planetary defenses. Graves exhaled. He had one shot. "All ships," he said, "focus fire on that flagship. Now." The entire fleet turned its attention to the Vasuan warlord's vessel. Everything was thrown at it. Railgun rounds, missiles, plasma bursts. The ship's shields flared violently, struggling to hold. Then they failed. The UNS Retribution's final broadside struck home, ripping through the flagship's core. A shockwave of energy exploded outward, consuming the surrounding ships in a fiery inferno. The Vasuan commander was dead. And suddenly, the enemy forces, leaderless, stunned, began to fall apart. The Tsalvanni panicked. The Vasuan survivors hesitated. And humanity? Humanity did what it did best. It kept fighting. By the end of the battle, the void was littered with burning wreckage. The Retribution was damaged, but it was still standing. And the Tsalvanni Dominion, along with their Vasuan masters, had suffered a defeat they would never forget. As the smoke cleared, Graves looked at the battlefield and knew one thing. This war wasn't over. Not yet. Because humanity had just declared war on the Vasuan ascendancy. And the galaxy was about to learn what that truly meant. The battle was over. The wreckage of Tsalvanni and Vasuan warships drifted through the void, the remnants of an alliance that had believed itself untouchable. But even in victory, Admiral Elias Graves knew the war was far from done. Humanity had been forced into this conflict. The Tsalvanni had started it by slaughtering a medical ship, a mercy vessel carrying the wounded and defenseless. The Vasuan had stepped in, propping up the butchers, believing they could keep humanity in its place. Now, neither enemy could turn back. The UNS Retribution stood at the center of the battlefield, its hull scared but still intact. The fleet had taken damage, but their spirit remained unbroken. On the bridge, Captain Renner scanned the latest reports, his face grim. "We took heavy losses," he admitted. 5 destroyers, 2 cruisers. Casualties are still being counted. Graves exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. "And the enemy?" Renner hesitated. "We wiped out the Vasuan flagship, crippled their frontline fleet, and left the Tsalvanni forces in complete disarray." But he hesitated, his voice lowering. "The Vasuan have more fleets, a lot more." That was the problem. The Vasuan ascendancy hadn't committed their full strength yet. They had underestimated humanity, believed they could send a single fleet to keep them in check. Now that Graves had destroyed it, the real war was coming. A transmission request flashed across the command screen. Not from the Vasuan, not from the Tsalvanni, from Earth. Graves straightened. "Put it through." The screen shifted, and the United Human Federation's council chamber appeared. Seated around the circular table were humanity's most powerful leaders, military commanders, politicians, strategists. In the center, President Ayla Keros leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Admiral Graves," she said, "we just received a transmission from the Vasuan High Council." Graves narrowed his eyes. "Let me guess. They're trying to make a deal." Keros gave a sharp nod. "They want a ceasefire. But only on their terms. They demand that we retreat from Tsalvanni space and allow the Dominion to rebuild. In exchange, they promise to ensure no further hostilities." Graves felt his jaw tighten. "And if we refuse?" The president's voice turned cold. "Then the Vasuan will commit their full war fleets against us." They made one thing clear: this is not a negotiation. It's a warning. Silence settled over the bridge. Every officer and crew member was listening. Graves clenched his fists. The Vasuan weren't backing down. They had tried to manipulate the war from the shadows, and when that failed, they had stepped in directly. Now, after losing one of their fleets, they were trying to force humanity into submission. But the Vasuan had made a critical mistake. They assumed humanity would fear war. They assumed humanity would bow. They had forgotten what humanity truly was. Graves turned his gaze back to President Keros. "We didn't start this war. But if they think we'll let them dictate terms after slaughtering our people, they're about to learn a very painful lesson." The president's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. "That's what I hoped you'd say." The channel closed. The decision had been made. Humanity would fight. Now, It was just a matter of how. The plan. A strike no one would expect. In the war room aboard the Retribution, the senior officers gathered around the holographic map of the galaxy. The Vosuan home systems glowed in ominous red, vast and untouchable. They outgun us, Renner stated. Their technology is more advanced, their fleet is larger, and they've had centuries to fortify their core worlds. Graves studied the map, his expression unreadable. Then we don't fight them where they expect. Renner frowned. Sir. Graves pointed to a section of space far from the Vosuan homeworlds. The Vosuan are arrogant, he said. They've been watching us for years, making sure humanity stays contained. That means they know how we usually fight. They expect us to hold the line, defend our territory, and resist. His eyes gleamed with something dangerous. So we don't resist. We attack. Renner blinked. Wait, you're suggesting we strike inside Vosuan space? Graves nodded. Not just anywhere. Here. He tapped the map. The system flickered, revealing a key logistical hub deep inside enemy territory. The Kelrith Nexus, one of the strategists murmured. One of the Vosuan's largest supply depots. Fuel, weapons, ship construction. It all funnels through there. Graves gave a grim smile. Exactly. They think they can drown us in their superior numbers. We're going to cut off their ability to fight. The room fell silent. It was insane. Suicidal. And yet, slowly, the officers started to nod. We'd have to move fast, Renner said. Get in before they can reinforce. Graves folded his arms. We don't just get in. We burn it to the ground. The infiltration. And the fire that followed. Days later, the human fleet launched the most daring mission in its history. A strike force of elite warships entered Vosuan space under stealth protocols, slipping past outer defenses. The Retribution led the charge, its engines dark, its systems running cold to avoid detection. The Kelrith Nexus loomed ahead, a massive station surrounded by refueling ships, supply carriers and freighters carrying the lifeblood of the Vosuan war effort. And humanity had come to rip it all away. All ships. Attack pattern Omega. Graves ordered. The human fleet exploded into motion. Torpedoes streaked through the void, slamming into fuel depots. Railgun rounds punched through storage tanks, igniting chain reactions that lit up the system like a dying sun. Missiles tore through freighters, cutting off supply lines before the enemy even knew what was happening. The Vosuans scrambled to respond, but they had never been attacked like this before. Their defenses were built to stop invasions, not surgical strikes. They had relied on their superiority for too long. And now it was costing them everything. Within an hour, the Kelrith Nexus was in flames. Within 2 hours, half the system was gone. And before the Vosuan could mount a counterattack, the human fleet vanished into hyperspace. The war changes forever. The United Human Federation's transmission went out across the galaxy hours later. A simple message, delivered to every major power, including the Vosuan High Council, to the Vosuan Ascendancy. You wanted to keep humanity in its place. You wanted to make sure we never became a threat. You failed. You tried to control us. You propped up butchers. You forced this war upon us. Now we are forcing it upon you. We will not stop. We will not bow. You will surrender, or you will burn. The war had changed. Humanity was no longer defending itself. Now it was hunting its enemies down. And the galaxy had never been so afraid. The war had changed. What began as retaliation for a single unforgivable attack had escalated into something far greater. The Xalvani Dominion had been shattered, their fleets obliterated, their leaders hunted down. The Vosuan Ascendancy, once untouchable, once the hidden hand guiding galactic affairs, now found itself on the defensive. Humanity had done the impossible. But it wasn't over yet. Admiral Elias Graves stood on the UNS Retribution's bridge, watching the tactical display of the enemy's final fortress world. Vathal Prime. the heart of the Vason ascendancy, a planet thought to be unassailable. And yet, here they were, humanity's fleets at the edge of the system, preparing for the final battle. A galaxy in fear, the war had changed everything. Humanity's bold strikes into enemy territory had crippled the Vason war machine. Their supply lines were in ruins, their colonies burned. Their fleets, once overwhelming in their power, were now scattered remnants of their former might. But the true impact of the war was not just felt by the Vason. It was felt by every race watching from the sidelines. For centuries, the galactic powers had believed that humanity was insignificant, just another young species struggling to find its place among the stars. That belief had been shattered. Now, the galaxy whispered a new truth, that humanity was not just another race. It was a force that, when wronged, would never stop coming. A force that, when threatened, would tear apart empires to defend itself. And now, that force was at the gates of Vathal Prime. The last stand. Enemy fleet is forming defensive lines, Captain Renner reported, eyes scanning the tactical display. They still have warships, but their numbers are less than half what they should be. They're scrambling. Graves studied the map. The Vason still had some strength left. A handful of dreadnoughts, scattered destroyers, orbital defense platforms. But they had been bled dry by months of relentless human assaults. They know they can't win this fight, Graves said quietly. They're stalling for time. Renner frowned. For what? Graves had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer. The Vason weren't just fighting for survival. They were trying to negotiate from a position of power. Somewhere, in the depths of their political chambers, they were scrambling for a way to save themselves. But Graves wasn't interested in negotiations. Not anymore. Not after the thousands of lives lost. Not after the Mercy ship they slaughtered. All ships, Graves ordered, his voice steady as steel. Advance. No more delays. The fleet moved. Missiles roared from human warships, cutting through enemy formations. Railgun rounds shattered Vason dreadnoughts in brutal, pinpoint strikes. Fighter squadrons darted between defenses, ripping apart enemy platforms with precise, surgical destruction. The Vason fought desperately. Their remaining fleets threw everything they had. Plasma lances, kinetic barrages, even suicide runs. But it didn't matter. Humanity had come too far. And they weren't leaving until the Vason surrendered or burned. The choice that would change everything. Within hours, the last Vason fleet was in ruins. The wreckage of their mighty dreadnoughts floated lifeless in the void. Their planetary defenses had been reduced to smoldering rubble. The UNS Retribution held position over Vathal Prime, its weapons locked onto the capital city. And then the transmission came. The Vason High Chancellor appeared on screen, a once powerful ruler now pale and hollow-eyed, his voice trembling as he spoke. Admiral Graves, he said, we surrender. Silence fell over the bridge. The war was over. The Vason, who had once sought to keep humanity in check, had been broken. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of the moment settled over everyone. Then Graves exhaled slowly. You should have surrendered when you had the chance. The Chancellor swallowed hard. We made a mistake. Graves' expression didn't change. No, you made a choice, and now you face the consequences. The Chancellor nodded slowly. What happens now? And that was the question. Humanity had won. But now, they had to decide what to do with that victory. Some among the fleet wanted vengeance. They wanted to burn Vathal Prime to the ground, just as the Talvani had burned the Mercy ship, just as the Vason had tried to snuff out humanity's future. But Graves, he took a slow breath. No executions, no planetary bombardments, he said at last. The war is over, but there will be justice. The Chancellor's shoulders sagged in relief. Then, you will accept peace. Graves' eyes were cold. Not peace, he said. Surrender. The Chancellor hesitated, then nodded. Humanity had won. But it would not become what it had fought against. It would become something greater. The future. A new order rises. The Vasoan fell. Their empire collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. The Dominion was gone, their influence shattered, and in its place, something new was born. The United Human Federation did not just win a war. It changed the balance of the entire galaxy. The old powers, those who had ruled unchecked for centuries, now looked to humanity with fear and respect. No longer a minor species, no longer an afterthought. Humanity was now a true power among the stars. And as Admiral Graves stood on the bridge of the Retribution, staring into the endless void, he knew one thing. This was only the beginning. Because now, the galaxy knew the truth. If you struck at humanity, you would answer for it in fire and fury. And humanity would never be afraid again.